Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin and we're going to talk about the counter trend argument. Now, that counter trend argument is kind of funny title because it's going to talk about counter trend in two different ways. So let's just jump right into it. Sit back, relax if you haven't already. Enjoy the show. This is going to be a very, very interesting video. Now, the reason why I decided to make this video is because I was scrolling through my YouTube and, even on Twitter, and I am pretty much convinced based off the titles of videos with influencers who have 1 million subs and hundreds of thousands of followers on X. I believe everyone, or at least 90% of the market participants that are remaining, believe we are starting a bear market, right? You're seeing titles of, oh, bear market beginning, what to do, how to navigate a bear market for dummies. I mean, just all these titles, right? I mean, it's everywhere. Everyone is convinced that the bear market has begun. And everyone's convinced that, this is the same layout as 2021 or late 2021, early 2022, and that it's just going to play out the exact same way. And what I want to do is just let's talk about the counter trade argument, right? Let's talk about why that argument is being made, because there's a valid argument to be made, right? Both ways. And then we'll talk about the counter trend argument, okay? Now, the reason why, for those of you who don't know, right? Those of you who may be confused, maybe you're newish to the market, you haven't been through a bear market before, you don't know how it works. Let me explain to you why everyone is convinced that the bear market is beginning. There's not many reasons to go over. It's very simple, actually. It's not a very complicated argument at all. The reason is because in the past, and what you see here via the purple line and the blue line is the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA. Okay? Now, you'll notice a lot of people also use the 50-week SMA, and we'll talk about that also. Any time in history that Bitcoin has lost the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA, and the 50-week SMA, the bull market was technically over. Okay? So as you can see, back in 2021, late 2021, early 2022, when Bitcoin lost the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA, it eventually came back up and retested it, but this was your counter trend rally before the bear market really got going. Right? So that was one instance. And then also, can't pull it up on this chart, but if we go back over to this chart, you can also see back in 2018 when Bitcoin lost the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA, it came up, got just back above it again, barely, but inevitably it lost the 50-week moving average. It lost the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA. This was the beginning of the more aggressive stages of the bear market. Okay, the same goes for the weekly time frame, 50 SMA, and I'll see if I can pull that up for you really quick so that you could see again, just so that you understand why this argument is being made and so that you're not confused. Let me just take that off real quick. Let's turn this off. Okay, also, right, as you could see, similar to the 2-day time frame, 200 EMA and SMA, any time that the 50-week SMA was lost, the bear market was beginning, okay? Or the more aggressive phases of the bear market were beginning, okay? That's in the last two cycles before this one. So that's argument number one as to why the main idea of the bear market beginning is happening right now, right? That's why you're seeing everyone scream it's a bear market, okay? Also, a loss of 106.8K in that 98K zone was a big loss too. If you are more technical than others who don't just use moving averages, that was the macro golden pocket on linear time frame and the macro 1.703. A loss of that level was a significant loss, okay? That's something that I have been talking about in detail also, more than just kind of looking at the moving averages type of thing. What I also want to show you is this, okay? This is another reason. If you look at ROI on Bitcoin after the cycle bottoms, and let's just refresh this real quick to make sure it's up to date. As you can see, ROI after cycle bottom shows that Bitcoin is technically at the end of its 4-year cycle, if you believe in that. So if you subscribe to the 4-year cycle theory, if you measure the cycle if you measure the ROI from cycle bottom, okay, so from the bear market bottom or from the halving, it technically shows that Bitcoin's 4-year cycle is over. If you measure it from the halving, it also shows you that Bitcoin cycle is technically over, okay? So that's another reason, right? So what are the two reasons we just spoke about as to why most at this point, and when I say most, I mean a high majority of people believe the bear market is beginning. Reason number one, the 50-week SMA is lost, and the 2-day 200 EMA and SMA are lost. And any time that has happened in the past, the bear market was beginning. What is reason number two? The main argument is that we're in Q4 of the post-halving year, and typically you find a cycle top when that occurs, okay? That's how it's always worked. So, again, those are the two arguments. That's it. Now, if I'm missing something, right? If I'm missing something, please comment below and let me know. But from my research around other people, around their ideas, and things that we already know about, that seems to be the main argument. Okay? Now, let's talk about the bullish argument for a second, right? Because there is a very, very more complex and larger bullish argument than there is a bearish argument. Back in 2021, late 2021, early 22, when the market topped, let me give you a little history lesson real quick because I was there for the entire thing. I remember it like it was yesterday. At the end of the bull market in 2021 and 2022, you had record high inflation. Inflation was going from 2%, 3%, 5%, 7%, 8% to 9%. It was record high, record moving inflation. You had a Fed who was ending quantitative easing and was announcing that they were going to start quantitative tightening. You had interest rates that were about to start getting raised at a rate that we've never seen before in history. I remember when Jerome Powell came out at Jackson Hole and said, we're going to have to feel some pain for a while. The Fed started raising interest rates by 75 basis points every meeting. Right? You're getting quarter basis point cuts now. Imagine getting 75 basis point rate hikes. Okay? So a mixture of an overheated economy, insanely high inflation, as high as it was almost in the 70s, 40-year high inflation, a Fed that was more hawkish than they've ever been after being completely late to the game. Bitcoin found and on top of that, major cycle euphoria. If you even hinted at the fact that the cycle top could be in back in late 2021, you were ridiculed. You were gone. You wouldn't have a YouTube. You wouldn't have an X. You would be attacked. Okay, there was mass euphoria in the market. Altcoins went ballistic. People bought the tops on altcoins. They were holding them 40% lower, thinking they were going to make new highs. They never did. Okay, this time in 2025, you have, and let me explain to you why it's literally the polar opposite compared to 2021, 2022. You have a Fed that is easing via lowering interest rates. You have quantitative tightening ending in December. It's only a matter of time after that before you start to see slight expansion to the balance sheet. Okay? You have inflation that is in the mid to high 2%. And key inflation metrics, when you dive into inflation, are in a downtrend. You have PMIs via services and manufacturing data that are still in a contractionary state. And projections are that those are going to start to expand to the upside in 2026, meaning that the economy is going to expand for the first time in years. Okay? Back in 2022, your PMIs were up in the high 50s, getting ready to roll over and go down. Okay? So from a macroeconomic standpoint, we are literally in a polar opposite environment compared to what we were in early 2022, late 2021. That is a major argument to be made for the bulls. Okay? Now, when you look at it like that, you say, okay, well, the Bears got a pretty good argument and the Bulls have a pretty good argument too. You have to make a decision on where you go from there. Me personally, I believe that the true cycle top was in April of 2021. I remember the whole thing like it was yesterday, like I said before. On Wednesday, July 21st, when Bitcoin was at $29,000, we already had cycle top euphoria. Every major technical, monthly, weekly, on-chain, macro indicator screamed it was a cycle top. We dropped 55%. Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, and Cathie Woods come out on a Wednesday and have a podcast while Bitcoin was at its lows and didn't do nothing for weeks. Started shilling Bitcoin like you wouldn't believe. In literally that exact day, Bitcoin found its bottom and then made that secondary rally into the end of the year. There was no volume on that rally. There was no sustainable spot-driven money flows. There was really no even durable sentiment. Most people had already given up or left at that point. This was the cycle top in April of 2021 when you had every indicator imaginable topping out. Here, you didn't. You barely made a new all-time high, but there was no indicator made a new all-time high. 80+% altcoins did not make a new all-time high, besides ones that were created at the middle of 2021, like Shiba Inu, right? That to me right there signaled that something was extremely wrong with this whole, cycle theory, right? But again, doesn't really matter that much, right? It doesn't really matter that much because, yes, does it eliminate potentially one argument on the bear side? Does it potentially eliminate that idea? Yes, it does eliminate that idea. But to me, I think the more important argument is the macroeconomic argument. And the facts is if you're sitting here and comparing this cycle to the last cycle, you need to rethink your idea. Because nothing about this cycle is the same as the top in the last cycle. And I just laid those exact reasons out for you. We are in a completely, utterly different, polar opposite macroeconomic environment. Again, 9% inflation, quantitative tightening just beginning, interest rates hikes just beginning, euphoria ending. Here, pessimism at an all-time high, interest rates coming down, quantitative tightening ending, PMIs still in a contractionary state, getting ready to expand next year. Not the same, folks. It's not the same. Whether it plays out the same or not is yet to be seen, and we're going to talk about that right now. But to compare it would be ignorant. You don't know it. I'm sorry to just say it. If someone's comparing this, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay? Very uneducated. Now, where do we go from here? What happens next? Right? Because now we've made the bullish argument, we've made the bearish argument. Those are the two arguments you're going to see online. Okay? That's what you're going to see. And you're going to see a significantly higher portion of people making the bearish argument because the people who make that bullish argument have more, I don't want to say experience, but just have more knowledge around how actual markets work rather than the people who just subscribe to the more simplified idea. That being, well, the timing of it says it's over and we lost these two moving averages, it's over, right? It has to be over, right? The people who go more in depth and talk about the actual macroeconomic correlation, it doesn't make them better than anyone else, okay? It doesn't. But it just makes their ideas more expanded and more technical, right? And more institutionally thinking, right? Rather than more simple-minded. Now, the big question is where do we go from here? That is what I want to talk about. I want to give you my opinion now, what I think, okay? I'm going to tell you what I think right now. In my opinion, it is not smart to ignore the fact that Bitcoin did lose 106.8K to 98K. That was the macro 1.703 fib. the macro golden pocket on linear time frame, the 50-week SMA, and the 2-day 200 EMA SMA. I don't want to be one of those people who ignore the fact that, yes, when that has been lost in the past, it was technically the beginning stages of the bear market. I don't also want to be the guy who ignores the fact that the 4-year cycle in terms of timing, if you subscribe to that, is technically over. Okay? I mean, in August, we talked about in detail the fact that there was a weekly bearish divergence, the fact that you should be extremely cautious on Bitcoin in the market, the fact that you should not be buying anything at this point, right? If anything, you should be taking profits from the April and June lows, right? That's all over with now, right? Now we've seen the big 35% drop. Maybe it's not done yet. We don't know. We're looking for that bottom as we speak. But in my opinion, you shouldn't ignore someone else's idea because it doesn't fit your bias, okay? Now, my other opinion is this. You should also not ignore macroeconomic factors, because the facts is all the same money that's in the stock market is all the same money that's in the crypto market. There's not some magical money in the crypto market that makes it run on its own time, separate from other markets. It does not work that way. Now, crypto doesn't have earnings. Crypto doesn't have other fundamental bullish narratives it can hang on to and make it climb higher, like guidance on earnings, revenues, right? Just, CapEx spending, M&A, right? It doesn't have that. It's a momentum trade. It's a monetary policy driven trade. So if you're going to sit there and ignore the fact that monetary policy drives the crypto market, you are the biggest fool in the market, and you will get caught with egg on your face in the future. This entire cycle for Bitcoin has been driven by high interest rates, a balance sheet reduction of the likes which we've never seen before, contractionary PMIs, meaning Main Street, normal everyday people are just not doing well, right? It has been a risk-off bull cycle. This is shown in the Russell 2000, in other low to mid cap indexes. They haven't done anything this entire cycle. If I'm not mistaken, I don't even think they've made a new all-time high. And if they did, maybe by a few percent, right? Similar to ETH, right? Hasn't even done anything. Barely, I don't even think it has made a new all-time. If not, maybe by 1% or 2%. Okay? This entire cycle has been driven by that. If you look up the equal weighted S&P, barely done anything this whole entire bull cycle, right? That means every stock in the S&P is equal weighted by, I believe, 0.2 rather than market cap driven, right? Like the regular index is, which shows that it's done so well over the last few years because really it's just 10 to 15 stocks that have been driving it the entire time. We could go sector by sector. We could go through discretionary. We could go through defensives. We can go through healthcare, right? We could go through energy. We could go through biotech, we could go through everything, right? Small to mid caps, we could go through everything. Small to mid cap tech, none of that has performed the same way as those 10 to 15, maybe even 20 stocks at this point that have done so well, that have driven the S&P and the NASDAQ so far. So to ignore macroeconomic factors and their correlation to markets is just the most ignorant thing you can ever do, okay? If your whole thesis is, oh, well, we broke a moving average, it has to be over, you need to educate yourself more about how markets work, okay? Now, with that being said, my opinion is this. Bitcoin is going to find a major low starting in these green lines that I've had mapped out for a couple months now, right? This is my reversal zone. I've been tracking corrections in crypto for years and years and years. They always last the exact same amount of time, anywhere from 114 to 174 days. We are in that reversal zone now. Does that mean we reverse right away? No. It means that in this zone, we are going to find a low at either 80K, where we already bottomed for the short term, either 79 or 75 through 70. Worst case scenario, you come down to this box, but for the sake of the video, we'll stick with this zone. In here, we're going to find a low on Bitcoin. In here, momentum is going to start shifting to the upside on Bitcoin. Okay? That is the highly probable scenario. That's what I believe. That's what all of the data tells me. Okay? That's how it's played out every single time in history. When we get that bounce on Bitcoin, that is when all of the answers are going to start to come. That's when we can make a definitive answer as to whether the more aggressive stages of the bear market are beginning or whether we are going to a new all-time high. Where are we currently at right now in terms of the macroeconomic situation? Well, the Fed's all over the place. We don't know exactly where they are. 1 minute they're hawkish, 1 minute they're not. 1 minute rate cut projections are at 30, the next are at 70. At the moment, rate cut projections for December are at 70%. Quantitative tightening is ending, okay? These things do not have instantaneous effects, okay? The fact that monetary policy is easing and will continue to ease next year just tells you that the macro environment is different than what it has been last cycle, right? We already made that argument. We compared and contrasted that. That right there already makes this cycle drastically different, okay? When Bitcoin bounces, what I will be looking for is, can Bitcoin break back above the 98K to 106.8K zone? In that zone lies those key MAs that I told you about, the 50-week and the 2-day 200 EMA and SMA, and those major fib levels where we topped out at in December, okay? If Bitcoin can get back above those levels, the chances of it making a new all-time high are good. And everyone will have egg on their face once again. Now, if Bitcoin comes back up to the 2-day 200 EMA and SMA and the 50-week SMA, similar to the way it did in 2021, and it starts to get rejected there, then you can make the argument and say, okay, this looks really similar. We're getting rejected at these key moving averages on their back test, and Bitcoin's making a macro lower high and rolling over. That's when the more aggressive stages of the bear market would begin. You know, remember something. Don't be so hasty to make a prediction, okay? I know people want to get clicks and they want to get likes and they want to be first and, oh my God, look at me, I win, I'm the best. None of that matters, okay? We're here to make money, okay? We're here to buy low and sell high. Nothing else matters. Don't be so hasty to just say, that's it, it's over, because you want to be first to something. Wait for the confirmations to come in. The fact of the matter is anytime Bitcoin has had a major drop at a cycle high, a supposed cycle high, it does inevitably have a counter trend rally to the upside. When that counter trend rally begins, we will have significant answers. When that counter trend rally occurred back in 2022, you had again record high inflation. Inflation that was still going higher at a pace we've never seen since the 70s. You had a Fed that was about to start raising rates at a rate we'd never seen before. And you had quantitative tightening that was just beginning, and it was going to be at a rate we've never seen before. And you had PMIs starting to crash lower, showing that the economy was going into a contractionary state due to tight monetary policy. That was your counter trend rally on Bitcoin back in 2022, then topped out at 48K. And then the real bear market began. Look at that, right? Here's your initial drop. Here's your counter trend rally. The macro situation was horrendous. And then you go into the more aggressive stages of the bear market over the next 8 to 10 months. Look where we are now. You haven't even had the counter trend rally yet. And you will get that counter trend rally in the coming weeks. But this difference is you have a Fed that is easing and is going to continue to ease in 2026. You have inflation that is absolutely tamed, right? If you look at the latest Truflation numbers, inflation's actually going down. Core PCE on Truflation was at 2.75%. 3 weeks ago, it's at 2.3% right now. Huge drop. CPI on Truflation was also around 2.8%. I think it's down to like 2.37%. So you're seeing that drop at the current moment. Rate cut projections are at 70% for December. The Fed is ending quantitative tightening in December, and PMIs are already been contractionary for the last 3 to 4 years. And those are about to start heading higher next year based off growth projections. GDP is supposed to be projected at 4.2%. That's going to start lifting those PMI numbers. So, you're going to look at your counter trend rally in 2022 compared to what you have now. You're going to get that counter trend rally, except your macro environment is completely and utterly different than it was in 2022. So please, for the sake of sanity and the sake of people who are trying to learn, do not compare this to 2022. Now, in the event we come back up, minus all the macro stuff out, let's just talk charts. Bitcoin is going to get that counter trend rally in the coming weeks. Could be in the coming days. It's going to happen in this zone, okay? Prepare yourself accordingly if you decide to. When that counter trend rally occurs, it will be extremely important to watch the 50-week moving average, the 2-day 200 EMA SMA, which all coincide within the 106.8K to 98K range. It will also be extremely important to monitor the macro environment throughout that process. What do the BLS inflation numbers look like? What does the Fed policy look like? Right? Are we going to be, continuing to ease? Is the job market continuing to soften? Right? The Fed chair is getting replaced in a few months. You know for a fact you're going to get a Fed chair who's going to be much more accommodative than the current one, right? Things are much different than they were in the previous top of the bull market. And lastly, and I probably should have mentioned this more, we have the worst sentiment in history. The sentiment, even in August, at the 120 to 125K level, was pretty bearish on Bitcoin. Okay? And then really ever since, all year, really you can make the argument that the sentiment has just not been good, right? Altcoins are 80% lower than where they were in December. Bitcoin did nothing all year except recover and then barely make a new all-time high, right? It's safe to say, I think anyone would agree with this, that in terms of the comparison to 2021, 2022, it's not even close. And we could take a look at one more chart real quick before we end the video. But social sentiment, right? Shout out to Ben, great website. Let's take a look here real quick. In terms of the overall sentiment in the market, it is the worst that it has been in history. And I'm going to show you it right now. And obviously, I say this every video. Shout out to the Into the Cryptoverse website. Great website. Everything's on there. It's the best on-chain website there is. So shout out to Ben. Shout out to his website. But yeah, in terms of sentiment, look at where we're at. Look at every single time you get spikes in social sentiment. March of 2024, social sentiment high. December of 2024, social sentiment high. May of 2021, social sentiment high. November of 2021, social sentiment high. January of 2018, social sentiment high. Every single social sentiment high you've ever seen has coincided with a macro top. Oh, even again, July of 2019, social sentiment high. You have never found a macro cycle top, even a mid-cycle top in crypto with social sentiment at literally absolute zero. It's at zero. Like it's never even been at zero before. It's at zero right now. Okay? So, again, to make the comparison, to make this complete and utter comparison to previous tops and previous cycles is not the way to go. I don't want to make the video run on any longer, but overall, wait for the counter trend rally. Wait to see if Bitcoin can reclaim levels before making an absolute, utter determination as to whether the more aggressive stages of the bear market are beginning or not. Remember something. If the bear market is beginning, you still have, 9 months of bear market, 9 to 10 months of bear market, okay? You're going to get a counter trend rally before that occurs, and you'll have a chance to do what you need to do if you haven't already done it already. Obviously, you should be managing risk the entire time. Should have been managing risk back in August, right? That was the time to do it. But what I'm saying is in terms of making that call, right? The absolute call, and before you start making your navigating the bear market videos, right? Like everyone is doing, maybe it'd be smart, right? Maybe it would just be a little smart, right? Not controversial to wait for a counter trend rally to see what Bitcoin can actually do. Remember something. Bitcoin dropped 35% on this rally. That's a pretty standard correction in crypto world. Are we done dropping yet? We don't know. So we'll see. But there will be a reversal in this zone. Bitcoin will have a counter trend rally. It will be extremely important to keep our eyes on the macroeconomic data and monetary policy updates throughout that counter trend rally. When we do that, we will have all the answers we need as to what's happening. But until then, I think it'd be inappropriate to make definitive decisions just with the hopes of being right about something. Okay? It's just inappropriate. It's immature. And it's just not what a real analyst would do, right? Without some type of ill intention behind it. Okay? I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe. Check the links in the description below. You guys have a nice day. Peace.